Gugu returned home after months away, suitcase still in hand, only to find strangers laughing in the living room. Furniture moved, pictures gone. Her entire house looked different. Shocked, she asked what they were doing there. The reply made her knees weak. "We bought this house from your brother." Her own blood had sold her home while she was gone. What he didn't know was that this house wasn't just hers. It was protected under federal law. And now, his betrayal would unleash a storm neither of them could control. Gugu had dreamed for months of coming back home. She carried her suitcase with a smile, already imagining the comfort of her own bed and the peace of her quiet house. But when she opened the gate, her heart dropped. There were cars she had never seen parked outside. Laughter echoed from the living room window. Confused, she rushed inside and froze. The furniture was not hers. Family pictures that once hung proudly on the walls were gone. Strangers sat in her chairs, eating, drinking, and laughing like they owned the place. One of them looked up at her as if she was the intruder. Gugu stammered, asking who they were and why they were in her house. A man answered casually, "This is our home now. We bought it from your brother." The words struck her like a knife. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Her own brother, Hira, had sold the very house their late father had entrusted to her. The buyers spoke with confidence, showing no doubt in their claim. They even pointed to papers they believed were legal, waving them with pride as if everything was settled. Her knees trembled, and she gripped her suitcase tighter. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a dream. The place she had called her safe space, her only inheritance, was gone. These strangers believed it was theirs now. And the person who had done this to her was not an outsider, but her own blood. A wave of betrayal rushed over her, heavier than the loss itself. In that moment, Gugu realized her joy of returning home had turned into the beginning of a nightmare. Gugu wasted no time. With her heart burning and her hands shaking, she went straight to Hira's place. He was sitting outside, relaxed, as if nothing in the world was wrong. The moment he saw her storm toward him, he smirked. Gugu asked him why he sold her house, her voice breaking with anger and disbelief. Instead of showing guilt, Hira leaned back and laughed. He told her she had never been responsible enough to deserve such a house. He reminded her of every small mistake from the past, twisting them into excuses for his betrayal. Gugu tried to reason with him, telling him the house was not just a building but her father's final gift to her. But Hira only grew louder, mocking her pain. He said she was foolish to think she could manage something so valuable. He bragged about the money he had made from the sale, describing it as the smartest decision he had ever taken. Each word felt like salt on her wound. She stood there, trembling, her eyes full of tears, but Hira showed no mercy. He even joked about how easy it was to trick the buyers and how quickly they handed over the money. He made it clear he didn't care about her feelings or about their father's wishes. To him, it was just business, and he was proud of what he had done. For Gugu, the pain of losing the house was one thing, but hearing her own brother mock her suffering cut deeper than anything else. His laughter rang in her ears, and at that moment she knew, this wasn't just betrayal, it was cruelty. And though he thought he had won, she silently promised herself this would not be the end of her story. The next day, Gugu gathered the courage to face the Wider family. She thought at least someone would understand her pain. Someone would remind Hira of their father's wishes. With tears in her eyes, she explained everything to her uncles, aunts, and cousins. She told them how she came back to find strangers living in her house, how Hira had sold it behind her back, and how badly it hurt her. She expected shock, maybe even anger directed at him. But instead, she was met with silence, then whispers, and finally, words that broke her heart even more than Hira's betrayal. One uncle cleared his throat and said, "Gugu, you should let it go. Hira is the eldest son. In our culture, he has the right to decide what happens to family property." Another aunt nodded and added, "You are a woman, and you will marry one day. Why fight for a house that will never truly stay with you?" Gugu looked around, her eyes searching for even one person to defend her. But all she saw were nods of agreement and faces that refused to meet her gaze. Hira stood tall in the middle of it all, smiling with pride as if the family's support proved him right. He even placed a hand on her shoulder and told her to stop acting childish, that she should be happy for him since he used the money for important things. Their relatives clapped his back, praising his cleverness, while Gugu stood frozen, her chest tightening with humiliation. Every memory of her sacrifices, working late nights, keeping the house in good condition, paying bills when others turned away, flashed before her. Yet none of it mattered now. In their eyes, she was not important enough, not powerful enough, and not worthy of their support. She realized the family she had trusted would never stand beside her. They had chosen Hira, not because he was right, but simply because he was the eldest son. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she swallowed her pain, refusing to let them see her completely break. In that room full of people she had once called her own, she had never felt so alone. Their words stabbed deeper than knives, and the shame burned hotter than fire. As she walked away quietly, the laughter and approval for Hira echoed behind her. In that moment, Gugu understood she could rely on no one but herself. Her family had betrayed her, and she would carry that scar forever. But deep inside, another flame was rising, one that would not allow this betrayal to be the final chapter of her story. That night, Gugu lay awake in her small rented room, staring at the ceiling with swollen eyes. Her heart was heavy, but her mind refused to rest. She kept remembering her father's words before he died, how he had told her, "This house carries more than bricks and walls. It carries history. Take care of it, Gugu." Those words would not leave her, and for the first time, she wondered if there was something more hidden inside that house than anyone else knew. With trembling hands, she dug out an old wooden key her father had once given her. He had told her it was for a drawer she must never open unless the time came. Tonight, that time had arrived. She unlocked a small iron drawer that had been tucked away in her luggage since his passing. Inside were dusty files, envelopes, and neatly folded papers marked with stamps she had never seen before. She carefully opened one envelope and froze as she read the words at the top, "Federal Government of Preservation and Heritage." Her eyes widened. The documents revealed that the house was not just private property. Years ago, her father had worked with government officials to have it registered as a protected federal site. It was tied to historic preservation laws because of its cultural value. The house could never be sold, altered, or transferred without official clearance from the authorities. Her breath caught as the truth settled in. Hira hadn't just betrayed her. He had broken a federal law without even knowing it. Page after page, Gugu read the documents, her heart racing faster. There were government seals, signatures, and legal codes she didn't fully understand but could clearly see were serious. At the bottom of one letter was even a warning. Any unauthorized sale or transfer will be deemed illegal and void, punishable under federal law. Her tears of sadness slowly turned into tears of relief. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt her father's presence guiding her. He had prepared for this, protecting her in a way she hadn't realized until now. She pressed the papers to her chest, whispering his name, feeling a strength she thought she had lost. The family thought she was powerless. Hira thought he had won. But in her hands, Gugu now held the very key to turning everything around. This was no longer just about her home. It was about justice. And she knew that soon, the truth inside those papers would shake her brother's pride and the family's betrayal to the very core. The next morning, Gugu sat at a public library with the documents spread out in front of her. She knew she needed to understand them fully before making any move. Her fingers shook as she typed the codes and references from the papers into the computer. Page after page of information appeared, and with each line she read, her eyes grew wider. The house wasn't just protected, it was registered under a strict federal law. That meant no one had the right to sell it, rent it, or even make changes to it without official clearance from the government. Her chest tightened as she realized the depth of Hira's mistake. By selling the house to strangers, he had broken a serious law. It wasn't just family betrayal anymore, it was a federal crime. The documents clearly stated that any illegal sale would be void and could lead to heavy financial penalties, public shame, and even criminal charges. Gugu leaned back in her chair, her mind spinning. She imagined Hira standing proudly at the family gathering, laughing at her pain. He thought he had won. But if the truth came out, his so-called victory would collapse instantly. The buyers would demand their money back, and the law would demand answers. She pictured him scrambling, humiliated, trying to explain how greed had blinded him. The more she researched, the more certain she became. Every detail she found confirmed her father's wisdom in protecting the property, The government files even listed her father's name, noting his role in preserving the home as part of national heritage. That meant the protection wasn't new. It had been set in stone years ago. Hira had walked into a trap of his own making, and he didn't even know it yet. For the first time since her return, Gugu felt her fear fading. A new strength replaced it. She realized she didn't have to beg anyone for support or prove her worth to relatives who dismissed her. The law itself stood on her side. She had been painted as weak, childish, and irresponsible, but now she carried the kind of power that could shake her brother's entire world. As she carefully gathered the papers back into her folder, her lips pressed into a determined line. This was no longer just about saving her home. This was about showing everyone that betrayal had consequences. And very soon, Hira would learn that his greed had not bought him freedom, it had bought him destruction. Gugu knew she had to be patient. She couldn't rush to expose Hira yet. If she moved too soon, he might find a way to twist the truth or hide behind the family's support. So she made a decision that shocked even herself. She pretended to give up. The next time she saw Hira, she lowered her eyes and acted defeated. She didn't argue, didn't shout, didn't even bring up the house again. To him, it looked like she had accepted her loss. That was exactly what she wanted him to believe. Soon after, their relatives organized a family gathering. It was supposed to be a peaceful event, but Gugu knew it was another stage for Hira to boast. As she entered the room quietly, she saw him standing tall in the center, surrounded by uncles, aunts, and cousins. He was glowing with pride, laughing loudly as he told the story of how he had rescued the family property from being wasted on her. Every detail he shared was twisted into a tale of his cleverness. Hira waved his hands as he spoke, explaining how easily he handled the buyers, how much money he earned, and how foolish Gugu had looked when she found out. Each time he mocked her, the relatives chuckled, nodding in agreement. They praised him for being smart, for acting like the true head of the family. Gugu sat in the corner quietly, her face calm, but inside her heart beat steadily with determination. She watched him, memorizing every arrogant word, every insult he threw her way. At one point, Hira even raised a glass, smiling as he declared, "This is just the beginning. From today, everyone will see that I know how to handle things better than anyone else in this family." His voice carried across the room, and once again the family clapped for him. He looked at Gugu with a smirk, convinced she was broken, convinced she was powerless. But beneath her silence, Gugu held her father's documents like a secret weapon. She already knew the storm that was about to hit him. The pride he showed today would be the very reason his fall would hurt more tomorrow. She let him shine, let him laugh, let him believe he had truly destroyed her. Because soon, when the truth was revealed, Hira's fake victory would turn into his greatest humiliation. And she would no longer be the sister everyone pitied. She would be the woman who brought him down with nothing but the truth. The day finally came when Gugu decided it was time to act. She walked into a lawyer's office with the documents her father had left behind. The lawyer, an experienced man who had handled many property disputes, carefully studied the papers. His eyes narrowed as he read the federal stamps and legal warnings. He looked up at Gugu and told her plainly that the case was strong. Strong enough to shake everything her brother thought he had built. With his guidance, she reached out to the government department in charge of historic preservation. After reviewing the documents, they confirmed the truth. The house was indeed protected, and any sale made without their approval was illegal. Not long after, official letters were sent out. The buyers, Hira, and even some of the relatives who had supported the sale were summoned for a formal review. At first, Hira thought it was just a family trick, another attempt by Gugu to cause drama. But when he saw the government's seal on the invitation, his smile faded. He tried to ignore it, but the buyers pressed him, demanding answers. They wanted to be sure their money was safe. On the appointed day, everyone gathered in a government hall. The atmosphere was tense. The buyers sat nervously, clutching their copies of the sale agreement. The relatives whispered among themselves, suddenly unsure if siding with Hira had been the right choice. Gugu entered quietly, carrying her folder of documents, her face calm but determined. Hira arrived last, still trying to act confident, but his eyes betrayed his unease. The lawyer stood beside Gugu, ready to present the case. Government officials walked in, their presence filling the room with authority. They explained why everyone had been called. Then Gugu's lawyer laid the documents on the table, showing proof that the house had been under federal protection for years. The officials confirmed each stamp, each code, and each signature. Every detail was valid. The buyers looked shocked, turning pale as they realized what this meant for them. The relatives sat in silence, no longer able to defend Hira. And Hira himself shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier pride slipping away. The room that had once echoed with his laughter now felt heavy with dread. Gugu stayed silent, letting the truth speak louder than any argument she could make. The storm she had prepared for was finally beginning, and Hira was standing right in the center of it. The room fell silent as the government officials finished going through the documents. Every stamp, every signature, every law reference was confirmed as authentic. Then one of the officials stood, cleared his throat, and spoke firmly so everyone could hear. He declared that the sale of the house was completely illegal. The property, he explained, had been registered under federal protection long ago. That meant it could never be sold, transferred, or altered without government approval. Any agreement made was automatically void from the very beginning. The words hit the room like a heavy stone. The buyers gasped, their eyes wide with disbelief. They quickly pulled out their own papers, flipping through them as if hoping to find a mistake. But there was none. Their expensive deal, which they had thought was safe, was nothing more than worthless paper. One of them turned to Hira angrily, demanding, "How could you sell us something you had no right to sell? We want our money back immediately." Another shouted that they would take him to court if he didn't return every single coin. Hira's proud smile disappeared. His face grew pale, and for the first time, he had no words. He tried to stammer an excuse, but the officials cut him off. They reminded him that ignorance of the law was no defense. By selling a protected property, he had committed a serious offense that carried penalties he could not escape. All eyes in the room turned to him. Relatives who once praised him now shook their heads in shame. Some whispered to each other, already distancing themselves from his actions. Gugu sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, watching the scene unfold. She didn't need to speak. The truth was speaking louder than anything she could have said. The very people who had mocked her and told her to stay silent were now seeing with their own eyes that she had been right all along. The weight of humiliation shifted completely onto Hira's shoulders. The buyers pressed him harder, demanding refunds. But everyone knew he didn't have the money anymore. He had already spent a large portion, flaunting his so-called victory. The realization spread quickly, and gasps filled the room as his downfall became clear. Hira lowered his head, his arrogance shattered. The same relatives who once clapped for him now looked at Gugu with quiet respect. The crushing revelation had landed, and the brother who thought he was untouchable now stood exposed, broken by his own greed. Hira sat frozen, staring at the officials and the buyers, unable to move or speak. The room had shifted completely. The confident, arrogant man who had strutted into the family gatherings with his head held high now felt the walls closing in. The buyers demanded their money back immediately, pointing at him with furious eyes. Hira tried to explain, tried to promise he would pay, but everyone knew it was impossible. He had already spent most of the money he earned from the illegal sale. Every word he spoke sounded empty and desperate. The government officials reminded him that selling protected property was a serious federal offense. There were fines, penalties, and even potential criminal charges waiting for him. Hira's chest tightened as he realized that his prideful decisions had not only destroyed his reputation, but could also land him in jail. He had thought his cleverness would go unnoticed, that his family would continue to praise him, but now all of that had crumbled. Relatives who had once laughed at Gugu and told her to let it go, now whispered nervously among themselves. Some shook their heads. Others avoided eye contact, clearly ashamed of having supported Hira. The shift was painful to watch, yet it gave Gugu a quiet satisfaction. She had been dismissed, mocked, and ignored, but now the truth had turned the tables completely. Hira's face went pale as he realized there was no way out. The buyers were firm, insisting on full repayment, while the officials explained the legal consequences for his actions. His arrogance, which had once made him feel untouchable, had become his undoing. He looked around at the faces of his family, seeing disappointment and shock where he had expected admiration. The laughter and applause that had once followed him were gone, replaced with silence and judgment. He tried to negotiate, to plead, but the law and the people he had wronged offered no mercy. The house, once his target for personal gain, had become the instrument of his downfall. Gugu, who had once seemed powerless and defeated, now stood as the calm center of authority, watching as her brother crumbled. Every step Hira had taken to assert dominance, every boast about his victory, now worked against him. He had built his arrogance on lies, and those lies had collapsed completely. The buyers left with their refunds secured, the officials finished their paperwork, and the relatives whispered in shock, realizing just how wrong they had been. Hira had lost everything, money, reputation, and respect, and all because he had underestimated the sister he had tried to destroy. Gugu stepped forward, holding her head high, her eyes steady on Hira. The room was silent, every gaze fixed on her. She felt the weight of months of pain, betrayal, and humiliation lift as she spoke clearly, without anger, but with the power of truth. "You sold what you never owned," she said, her voice calm but firm. "This house carries more history than your greed could ever touch. And now it stands, not as your gain, but as your downfall." Hira's face flushed, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. He had no defense left, no excuse strong enough to erase the reality everyone now saw. The relatives who had once mocked her looked away, their shame visible, while the buyers nodded, finally understanding the full truth. Gugu turned slightly to the officials and the buyers, acknowledging their presence with a quiet nod. She didn't need to shout or demand respect, it was given naturally. Her father's documents, her patience, and her courage had spoken louder than Hira ever could. She had not only reclaimed her home but also her dignity, proving that honesty and perseverance would always triumph over greed and arrogance. As she looked around, the applause began, first small, then louder, until it filled the room. People who had doubted her now celebrated her courage. Friends, neighbors, even some of her relatives whispered words of admiration, acknowledging her strength. Hira stood frozen, realizing for the first time that his arrogance had cost him everything, while Gugu had turned every insult, every betrayal, into a victory she had earned with her own patience and wisdom. For Gugu, it wasn't just about the house. It was about showing that no one could take what was rightfully hers, not through lies, not through deception, not even through family betrayal. Every corner of the home, every wall, every memory it held, belonged to her. Not because she had fought with anger, but because she had waited for the truth to reveal itself. With the final words spoken, Gugu walked through the living room, now empty of strangers, her steps steady and proud. She touched the walls lightly, feeling the history and love her father had built into the house. In that moment, she knew that she had not just reclaimed a home, but had also claimed her place in her own life, stronger, wiser, and untouchable. The applause continued, echoing around her, as Gugu finally smiled, not in triumph over her brother, but in triumph over the betrayal and injustice she had endured.